Today we are pleased to present positive news in the fight against cancer in our forum. Changing Lives, The New James, and Pelotonia. Please thank our sponsors, Cardinal Health and my law firm, Porter Wright, for their support today, and help me welcome Don Casey of Cardinal Health to the stage to introduce the speakers. Thank you. Don?
It's always tough to know that you're going to be speaking plus or minus a few minutes of one of the true gems in Columbus, Michael Caligiuri, and I've had the pleasure of working with him and his organization over the past 2 years, and I will tell you, it's one of the proudest things I'm incredibly proud to be associated with the incredible work you guys are doing. But thanks, Rich. Where's my Cardinal Health table? So we're all back there. We're incredibly proud to sponsor the event today, and we're very happy to be associated with the CMC. It does great work on bringing people and ideas together in a forum where you're always going to learn something, and you'll always leave one of these with a couple new ideas and a couple new business cards. So we're excited about that. I do also have the pleasure to introduce Doug Ulman. Doug, hand up there. Doug is the new head of Pelotonia, and for those of you who don't know, Pelotonia is one of the principal fundraising engines for the James Institution, and it's amazing. In 6 years, we've raised over $80 million, and if you think about something that didn't exist to now become the largest single one-day biking event in the world, and an event that inspires people with not only the compassion that people show the survivors, but also the philanthropy that people who participate in this ride do. It's absolutely amazing. And now we have literally one of the really, really great leaders in this space coming to Columbus that's really going to take us to new heights. So Doug, welcome to Columbus, and we're incredibly proud to have you here. And you know, I kind of just mentioned Mike, but if you are driving down 315 and see that gleaming new building, you have to be impressed about the resources this community has been able to bring to bear. And as impressive as the building is, the organization that works in there and works for cancer patients every single day is even more impressive. And if you're going to keep drawing up the pyramid, the building is great. The people who work there are even better. But I think we have literally one of the brightest minds of all cancer research in Michael Caligiuri. So Michael, glad that you're able to spend some time with us today. And we also, we are blessed to have an individual willing to participate in the conversation, Jerry Spear, who is a cancer survivor. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my host, and they write some of this stuff out, and we were debating on this, and I'll just get a show of hands. For those of you who don't know Ann Fisher, I think everyone is willing to say she is brilliant. I think we'll all agree on that. Everyone good on that? Energetic, good. But they came to a word that I thought it was a bad words for friends thing that got out of control, ubiquitous. So if anyone knows what ubiquitous means, at the end of the day, I'm more than happy to do that. For the record, on Words with Friends, it's 257 points. So with that, Ann, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You know, thank you so much. If you want me to be ubiquitous, you can get our app. WOSU app. It's free, easy to download, and you can listen to me anytime you want. Thanks so much for joining us today. In meditating on the conversation today, which in my case means having a panic attack at 5 a.m., which I do just about every day, I came away with the image of the humanity of it all. I started to think about Pelotonia. I started to think about Jerry. I started to think about the work that you're doing at the New James. From the healing elements of the inpatient rooms, and I love talking about that above all because it has the best view at the OSU campus, that of the SHU. To the New James Cancer Hospital, to the location of the research labs on each floor, to the thousands of people who participate in the ride every year to raise money for cancer research. You know, unlike maybe 25 or 30 years ago, I might have been thinking about machines and discoveries or something I didn't necessarily understand, but Dr. Caligiuri, it just seems like humans are part of the equation at almost every level now in a really easy to understand way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing what's happened in the last 3 decades. I mean, if you think about, you said 25, 30 years ago. 30 years ago, I was graduating from medical school, and you know, there was no outpatient therapy. First of all, everybody was in the hospital, and you stayed in the hospital, and really no one left with a diagnosis of a cure. And very challenging. There were about 4 drugs total in cancer for chemotherapy, and there was just one result. And if you just fast forward today, 30 years later, not a long time, just from the James, we have 13,000 people cured of cancer in America, 14 million people cured of cancer. Everybody here, if I asked for a show of hands, would be able to raise their hand if I said, do you know someone living successfully with cancer or cured of cancer? We'd all raise our hands. And, the beauty of that, just think about that, what's happened. And it's a lot of humans working together, a lot of teams, all the way from the laboratory bench out to the community working together and making this very challenging disease beatable. And that's what we're seeing now. It's really, really inspiring.
And I think that, I was thinking, Doug, you've said that you were drawn to the community-wide effort surrounding Pelotonia. You said in an interview last fall that you had rarely ever seen in philanthropy, business, and academic communities fully aligned in this way. And that kind of interested me, and I wondered why you think that is. There's cancer runs all over the country all the time. You were involved in a big cancer fundraising operation before this. What's unusual about this?
Well, I think there's a few things that are unique. First and foremost, my wife and I, who's here today, we've been here a month. And when I look out at all of you, I see so many familiar faces that are involved in so many things in this community. And as an outsider sort of coming in, I can tell you that strikes me as something that's very unique to Columbus. People coming together around a common purpose to invest in something that will benefit this community and eventually communities outside of Central Ohio. So I think that's one piece of it. I think the other piece is that historically there's been silos between the grassroots participatory fundraising activities and the ultimate impact. So you'd have events that raised money, and that money would be transferred somewhere else, and people would never really understand or feel like they were a part of that process. And I think one of the unique things about Pelotonia is this relationship between the organization and the James, and this collaboration, because ultimately it's going to take every single person in this room and millions of people outside of these walls to truly change the landscape in the future for people who are diagnosed. And so the more we can connect the research that Mike and his team, and many of them are here today, are doing with the participants and get that engagement level higher, I think the sky is the limit in terms of what we can achieve together.
We were just talking, Mike Caligiuri and I, about the grant proposal that he's writing, a 2,200-page grant proposal. I said, you do that? Don't you have somebody over there that can do it?
Actually, I have a huge team, and many of them are here today, and they've contributed ably to it. Funny story is about 5 years. We have to do this every 5 years, and it's what's called a competitive renewal, and it's the National Cancer Institute asking, what have you done lately, and what are you going to do? And there are many, many sections to it, and it's 2,200 pages. And 5 years ago when I was writing it, my son was a senior in high school, and I told him what I was doing, 2,200-page grant. He kind of looked at me and said, single-spaced?
Newfound respect
like, yep,
for Dad.
11 font. I couldn't even use 12 font, So, but it's in a way, I'll tell you, it's a labor of love, but in another way, it's really good to do because you really see, a lot of people, we think of the James as a cancer hospital, but behind that or within that, there's this army of researchers, and that's the Comprehensive Cancer Center at Ohio State. It's about 270 researchers, and we have them in agriculture, we have them in law, we have them in business, we have, of course, engineering, nursing, pharmacy, medicine, dentistry, all these different researchers, and they're all working on cancer, different aspects of it, and they all come together under the Comprehensive Cancer Center. It's like a dome. And we have 5 themes, and every one of those 270 people is in one of those 5 teams, and they're working together. They're working on one aspect of it, controlling cancer in Appalachia, where cancer is really high, or developing drugs in translational therapeutics, or working on the cell in molecular biology, cancer genetics, leukemia, et cetera. So it's really neat to see, and we've had like 5,000 publications. We have like $49 million in grants, and how it all clicks is fascinating. So for me, it's challenging because I have to write and rewrite the whole thing in 11 font, single-spaced. But it's also inspiring to see how much progress we've made. Just literally in the last 2 years, we've had 2 drugs FDA approved for cancers that were incurable. So they're both pills. So you can imagine like walking into the doctor's and you've tried 8 or 9 treatments, as many of these patients have, and the doctor turns to you and says, I've got some really good news. We've got a pill that's going to put this into remission with a 92% chance of you staying in remission a long time when you're on death's door. That was done here at Ohio State University. It was done in the Comprehensive Cancer Center from the basic labs right up into the hospital and then out to the world, as Doug said. I mean, you know, it's a $1 billion drug now. So that's what, you know, makes this so incredibly exciting for all of us, whether you're in administration, you're a nurse, you're a physician, you're a researcher, any aspect of what you do.
Jerry Spears, speaking of people, a lot of times we forget, you know, about the patient. And you're not only, you're the patient on our panel, but you stay active in helping other people cope with the challenges, the multidimensional challenges. You were diagnosed with a very rare form of cancer in 2009. Tell us a little bit about it and that you want to share with us, and what spurred you forward into trying to help others?
Well, I've always believed that you give back, and I've always been a believer in the James. They had an outpatient hospice program many years ago, and I was an outpatient hospice volunteer. And I've brought several family members and friends from throughout the United States here for treatment. In 2009, I found that I would be a patient myself, and decided that I needed to really figure out, arm myself with as much knowledge as I could about what my particular cancer was. And I went out and got second and third opinions at top cancer hospitals in the United States and realized that the best treatment was at Ohio State for me. And it was very successful. And I decided that when I finished my treatment to go back and help other individuals realize that this is doable. It may seem like the worst thing that's ever happened in your life, but you will get out of that chair. So I really believe that I'm called to help others.
In designing the hospital, it was a 10-year process of design and build,
Yes.
right? And really the things that we see in the hospital when we walk in there, and I've only seen it when it was empty during a tour, but the things we see are really, a lot of that only happened in the last few years.
Right.
How do you do that? How do you start
Yes.
with a shell of something and then fill it up? Now, literally, is almost filled with, it's almost at capacity already.
You keep changing your plan.
Sorry.
No, you're right.
I know that feeling,
What's
but-
happening in oncology is really fascinating and very, very important for us curing cancer. And that is that in the last 10 years, and really the last 5 years, we've come to realize that basically if everybody in this room had lung cancer, there might be 5 people. We all had lung cancer. Walk in, spot on your lung, do the biopsy. The pathologist looks at it on the microscope and says, this is lung cancer. But when the molecular biologist looks at that at the DNA level, at your gene level, and says, what caused it to look the same in all of these? There are probably only 5 or 6 people in this room that would have the same cause. So what we found is that lung cancer really isn't lung cancer. Lung cancer is many diseases caused by many different things that when it actually comes up as a cancer, looks the same, but the cause of it is different. And so you want to have within your hospital the ability to get right to the cause, because the treatment becomes different. So as this is evolved, this notion of what's called tumor heterogeneity, meaning it's not all the same tumor if everybody here had lung cancer. It's, you know, probably 90 different types. And so you want to be able to, one, do the fast genome sequencing, if it's appropriate, to determine what the DNA says, and 2, look on your shelf or in your laboratory of things that there are to say, well, does this work for this? And what we're finding is that, you know, drugs that were traditionally, well, this is a breast cancer drug, or this is a lung cancer drug, we're using in different organ sites, breast cancer drug for lung cancer, because actually that breast cancer tumor and that lung cancer actually had the same DNA cause, and they responded to the same drug. So you build your building thinking things are moving, and now we have laboratories where we're doing what's called, we're set up to do, we're just still putting it in place, but, you know, genomic sequencing to look at the DNA. what we're calling digital pathology, to do computerized imaging of the slide, things that the pathologist just can't see. You can imagine looking at a slide of someone's tumor and being able to go, oh, I just saw 50,000 other cases like this one. Well, that's what a computer can do now, supercomputing. And it can find all those cases if they're all scanned into the computer and say, well, how did all those, of the 100 people there, how did those 4 that actually are the same do with such and such treatment? So there's embedded within the patient rooms, there are laboratories where we're filling in, and some are going to be filled and some are going to stay empty for a little bit as things change and we know what we need to do. That's kind of how we did it.
There's an ebb and a flow to it all.
What's that?
An ebb and a flow to it all.
Yes, absolutely. And then just for everything I've just told you, there are things you go, well, this is no longer useful, you know. And so it's a process.
Jerry Spears, when you're in the middle of it all, how hard is it to understand what someone like Mike Caligiuri is saying right now?
Well, if you're me, you spend a lot of time reading and understanding that I've come to understand that even though my cancer was rare and aggressive, it was unusual. And what Dr. Caligiuri's point is that the treatment really gets down to you and your cancer. Even if we had the same diagnosis, it doesn't mean the drugs that I have would necessarily work for you, even though they were successful for me.
Makes it a lot more complicated. I think we've talked about that before. A lot more stuff to talk about and a lot more facets to it. And that's one place that Pelotonia comes in with funding, is it can do smaller nuggets of issues. It can address them with smaller funding streams.
Sure. I mean, we are operating in an environment right now, we as the sort of broader cancer research community, and Mike can speak to this, in a challenging time. So federal funding has been cut year after year after year over the last decade. And so we've got to figure out how to create new revenue streams that will inspire and fund the next generation of scientists. And so if you are in this room and you've participated in Pelotonia, whether you've ridden or contributed or volunteered, I mean, you have enabled the next generation of scientists. You have funded people with idea grants that are going to individuals who might have an idea that others aren't going to fund. The government's not ready to fund it because it's too high risk or for whatever other reason, but Pelotonia is able to step in and invest in those individuals. You're also helping to attract some of the world's experts to the James. And there are people in this room, one individual in particular, Dr. Pollack, who is here now, who is probably the world's expert. And I can tell you that when I was diagnosed with a very rare sarcoma at the age of 19, he was one of the first people I found online as having expertise in this field. So to see him sitting here and to have that knowledge and that resource in Columbus, Ohio at the James is spectacular. And so again, if you're part of that Pelotonia community, you have enabled all of these things and much more. And the future is incredibly bright because the community working together can solve the biggest challenges that Mike has just laid out.
Okay, where is he? Okay, thank you so much. The Ken Burns, WOSU, spoiler alert, the Ken Burns film, Cancer, the Emperor of All Maladies, will air on WOSU TV on March 30th through April 1st. It chronicles the 4,000-year effort to understand, treat, and ultimately cure cancer. And when I read that, I thought, wow, 4,000 years. Dr. Caligiuri, a headline for an article you wrote about the new James for OSU's on-campus publication said, "A cancer-free world begins here." And I wondered, what do we even mean by cancer-free anymore? When you said that earlier, I thought of that.
Yes. Well, you know, it may be challenging to imagine because 1 out of 2 men and 1 out of 3 women now will be diagnosed with cancer in a lifetime. It's very common. And further, we're staying alive longer, we're getting older, and cancer is a disease which increases with age. So how are we ever going to get ahead of this? And it has to do with what I'm talking about, getting to the actual cause of cancer. The neat thing right now is that we're up against the wall in a good way. There's nothing beyond DNA in terms of causing cancer, and now we can read the DNA. So it's like having a book and written in a language that you didn't understand, and then somebody provides you the translation. It's like, sooner or later, I want to be able to read this book because now I've got the tools, I've got the code, and I've got the tools to decode the book. So we now can do the sequencing of the DNA, and so we can figure out the causes of cancer. Now the challenge is that what I just said is that if everybody in this room had lung cancer, I'd have to sequence every tumor. But if I was sequencing every tumor and collected that information and knew how the 5 people were cured, what did they have? And the 5 people that did not respond at all to therapy, what did they have? And I started to collect that with lots and lots of people. I actually could develop what would be kind of the unabridged dictionary. It's got every single cause of cancer because there's only going to be a finite number of these gene changes that cause cancer. It's not an infinite number. It's probably several, maybe 10,000 of the gene. So, you know, with enough patients, you're going to collect that, and then you follow how they do, what they were treated with. And I equate it to like when you go online for Amazon, right? You go to buy a book, and you buy the book, and like a minute later, there's, if you like this book, you're going to like these 3 books. I'm like, how did they know that? Well, the reason why they knew that is because in an instant, they searched everybody else in their database that read that book. And then they said, what else did they read? And then they found the 3 other books between all those people that were the same, and then they just served them up to me. And I will like those books. And what we're doing is we're collecting all of this information. And you know, I find out you have this gene mutation. That's the book you've read. So then I go to the thing and I say, okay, well, he's got this gene mutation. Who else has this gene mutation? Oh, well, here's the nation. Here's 50 other people, and this is how they were treated. And these ones were cured, and these are the ones that weren't. Here's what I'm going to treat you with. So in other words, having the information, collecting it, and having the IT platforms to deliver that Amazon kind of, here's your next 3 books, that's how we're going to solve the whole mystery. That's one big component of it when you're diagnosed. And the other is behavioral, changing the way we behave, understanding the genes that make us susceptible to getting cancer and maybe others not susceptible. And then what are the behaviors we can alter? Is it sunlight? Is it smoking cessation? Is it where we live? Is it the type of activity we have? That can actually really reduce the kind of cancer that we're supposed to get.
But don't we already know a lot of that already? I mean, where do you think some of the mystery alleyways are that maybe we don't know yet?
There's lots we don't know yet. But again, being at the DNA level, it will be very easy to find out. A perfect example is we've discovered a gene that is passed on and causes cancer. Most cancer that you get, you know, it's not your mother had it or your father had it or your sister had it, it's just kind of sporadic. There's one type of colon cancer where if your mother or father had this, you have a 50% chance of having this gene. If you have this gene, you're going to get the cancer. So we've discovered that gene, and right now we have 42 hospitals across the state of Ohio, it's colon cancer, sending us one slide of every patient's colon cancer, and we check it for that gene. So if they have that gene, we can go to their families and say, look, you had this gene, I need to check your mom and your dad, all your sisters and brothers, your kids, your nieces and nephews. 50% of those people are going to have that gene. They're never going to get the cancer because we're going to be able to screen them before they ever get it, even though they're a carrier of that gene and they were going to get it. Because we know it's a colon cancer, we can monitor them so that they never get the cancer. So once you get to the DNA level and you can do these screens rapidly, we're going to screen 3,000 people in 2 years in the state of Ohio. We're going to identify hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that carry this gene, and they're never going to get the cancer. And we're paying for that with $3.5 million from Pelotonia. No one's paying for it. It's all free, all the hospitals. So that's what you're all doing.
Hey, Pelotonia. Jerry Spears, you had a very rare form of cancer, and I wanted to ask you about what it's like. There's not somebody, already we know we really truly are all snowflakes, and we not only share very little in common with each other when it comes to getting sick, but we can't even say, yeah, I've got lung cancer too, or anything anymore, because there's so many different kinds we can't share. How do you find that community, or does it not necessarily matter what kind?
I don't think that there's a hierarchy or a club that some people will say. I think cancer is cancer. And you know, it's no different than any other sort of illness.
How do you stop feeling like a number? Or how do you avoid feeling like a number?
Well, you surround yourself with the best team you possibly can, and I believe that that's what I had at the James and why I selected them.
I was going to say it didn't come to you by chance.
No, No, it was a decision that I made that these were the people that were going to be integrally involved with what I had to go through. And it isn't just one person who goes through cancer. It's always a community of people. And you have to have a community that you feel comfortable with and that care back. And that is what I had. So it was very easy for me in that sense to be a patient at the James.
One of the things I just mentioned that Jerry mentioned is really important. Most important thing I'll say today to all of you is that if you have a diagnosis of cancer, the most important thing you can do with that diagnosis is to get a second opinion from an expert in that particular cancer before you start any treatment. Yes. I was just saying earlier to Ann that cancer is generally not an emergency. There are some cases like acute leukemia where you need to get in and get treated, and that's very important. But generally, being told you need to do this or that within days is generally not the case. So you have time to get a second opinion. And the way we constructed the James, and might have influenced your decision without knowing it, is about 15 years ago, we started recruiting doctors that do just one cancer. So they research in that cancer, they lecture around the world in that cancer, they teach medical students and residents that cancer, and they treat patients in that cancer. And all they do, all the time they're working is that cancer. So they get to see the span of all the possible presentations, all the side effects of all the medicines, all the consequences of the surgery, radiation, the chemotherapy, et cetera. That's all they do. They're an expert, world expert in that particular cancer. Now we have about 170 such physicians for every single type of cancer, whether it's rare or common. Common is kind of, like I said, at the DNA level, there is no common routine cancer anymore. So always get a second opinion and get one from an expert. And they might say, you know what you've been told, what you're doing, go with it, stay where you are. They're usually the people that know the cutting edge of like, well, yeah, that was true yesterday, but today we have this pill and this kind of thing, because they're usually participating or leading those kinds of studies. So that's the most important thing I can say today is get a second opinion always from an expert in your particular cancer. Really key. And that sounds like what you did, Jerry, without knowing your history. You went around and talked to people, and it's like, wow, these people really understand the breadth and depth of my situation.
I did, and actually I reached out to Eric Weiner, who's on the Komen Research Board and somewhat of a specialist in triple-negative breast cancer. And I wrote him an email on a Sunday evening, and he got back to me within a couple of hours and said, would you like to come up to Boston? So I went up, and he was the first of my second opinions.
That's a good thing, too.
Third, fourth, fifth.
It's a very good thing. I mean, that's the way to do it.
Plan B, Plan C.
Everybody, you need to be kind of an educated consumer about this. It's like you would do anything else. Would you just go out and buy a car and say, oh, I'm not going to look at price, I'm just going to boom.
But even
Same
then,
thing.
Jerry faced that moment with a physician who said, you're not going to get a different diagnosis. And you have to kind of, did you have that experience?
Well, I think it's such a
it all sounds great, and it makes sense, it's logical, but it's emotional.
Sure.
You don't want to hurt someone's feelings, particularly the person that might be treating you for cancer. Right?
I don't know about that. Any good treating physician.
On a logical level, I don't agree with it either, but on an emotional level.
Any good treating physician will not only welcome you getting a second opinion, they'll encourage you to.
That's
and if
the
they
key.
don't, that's not a good sign. They should. If somebody comes to me for leukemia, I want them to go talk to somebody else. I want to know I'm right.
Right.
That's simple. It's that simple.
And I think with cancer, the reason for a second opinion isn't because you're hoping someone will say, you don't have cancer.
Right.
It's what is the best way to treat this? How would you treat this? And what are the pros and cons? And really, you have to, as Dr. Caligiuri said, you have to be your own advocate. You can't be a passenger in this experience. You have to take control and understand that the decision that you make, you have to feel good about, because it's a very important road that you're going to go down. And you want to make sure that you've made the decision, you feel good, somebody didn't make it for you, and that you've got the best group with you as you go down this path.
Yeah, and I would just echo what Jerry said. I mean, I think, when I was diagnosed, I realized how naive I was. I mean, I thought I was 19.
Well,
I was
you were 19.
in school, exactly.
Yeah.
But, you know, I had highly educated parents, and yet we sort of felt like it reduced us to this level playing field that anyone would be on when they hear the words, "you have cancer." And I did the same thing as Jerry. I mean, second opinions. I was on the East Coast, went to a bunch of places, went to one of what is considered the world's best cancer centers, although I'm here to tell you it is nowhere near as great as the James. And I'll never forget getting a second opinion from one of the world's experts. And after about 3 minutes of being in the room, my father asked a question. My dad's a highly educated individual. And this physician looked at my parents and said, "We've already been over that." And I have never seen my dad as angry as he was right then. And so you talk about needing to be an advocate. And he calmly looked at this physician and said, "Well, I guess we're going to go over it again." And you know, you can have a great experience or a bad experience anywhere, but I think Mike's point is right. I think the best physicians, many of which are at the James, you know, they have such confidence in what they do and such specialty and focus in one type of cancer that asking for a second opinion is encouraged and welcome. And it's not seen as a threat, and it's also not a business decision. It's not driven by how many patients can I attract to the James. It's driven by what is in the best interest of this individual. And that, unfortunately, in many places across the country, is not the norm.
We've been talking a lot about, you know, the molecular basis of cancer and some pretty technological things, and all of the ways that the James was constructed to not just to treat the whole person on many, many different levels, and it's fascinating. But I was wondering, how do you transition from helping, curing, treating, and researching to letting go when the time comes? We talked about there used to be a hospice at the James. That's not, you know, it's not an inpatient. It's but yeah. There's other hospices out there. It's not the be all end all. But how do you do that in this era of
that's a great question.
Amazing discoveries?
We partner with communities, hospices, just a model that works best for us. Well, kind of putting on my hat as a physician, you know. The most important thing I tell the patients, when you do have terminal illness, we can talk about cancer, but it's germane to everything, is, you know, you do have an opportunity. It's an opportunity to bring closure to a lot of things that really are still open. And what I do as a treating physician is I try to bring the patient to that moment, that opportunity where, you know, there can be a lot of I love yous and a lot of good closure with a lot of people. So you kind of take the opportunity to really be together, seize the moment, say all the things that need to be said, and come together. That, in my experience, leaves the family grateful as opposed to angry and disoriented and confused, because they're being brought into this just to say someone's diagnosed with cancer and you don't really know what's going on. Well, the family being brought into someone with cancer is in the same boat. What do I do? What do I say? Is he going to live? Is this, you know, where are we? So the physician and the team, social worker and nurses, et cetera, coming together and really orienting everybody and taking advantage of the moment and making that moment a special moment, an opportunity, is I think, a good approach for terminal illness.
In a few minutes, we're going to move to the audience questions. So kind of start thinking about what you want to ask. There's lots to talk about. But I'd like to finish, I guess, with this thought or question. The idea of what we keep talking about. So there's so many choices now. The James is, let's see, it's the third largest cancer hospital in the nation. And we've mentioned earlier that it already is almost filled to capacity for the time being. Can a hospital like this get too big? How did you decide on how big you would make it in the first place? And what goes into that decision? Do you want to be the biggest necessarily? Does it mean best?
No, I mean, it's sized for populations. So Columbus, like 15th largest city, we can calculate what the incidence of cancer is going to be in our community, and we can make calculations. But no, we want it to be, what's more important for us is that, you know, it's affordable, and for us, fortunately, it was very affordable. Second, that it's, you know, best in class, not biggest. That we do have that flexibility built into it. By the way, we have 2 floors that are not filled out, so as
It's
we need.
97% of what's
Yeah,
available
we have
at
right
this
now,
point,
we have,
yeah.
we're opening 10 beds every other month, and those are filled out. But we also have some floors that haven't been, they're just literally shelled. So we have room to expand, and it seems like we'll be doing that sooner than later. So, no, it's more built with a flexibility, best in class, happens to be the third largest. What's really neat about it is, you know, everybody in our house is from one family. And that's really neat. There's only about 12 or 13 cancer hospitals in the whole country. People don't think of that, but usually it's a ward on a big general hospital. And you have a lot of mix of different people. I'm on cardiology today, I'll go to oncology tomorrow, and I'll be in dermatology the next day. What's nice about the Wexner Medical Center is that we have, you know, kind of a university hospital, we have a psych hospital, we have a heart hospital, we have a cancer hospital, and if you're an employee there or wish to be an employee with us, you work where you're called to work, here. And so you get a collection of people that are really aligned for the cancer mission. And I think that's what Jerry feels when you go to the James. Everybody's there because they want to be there, not because, well, I'm a cancer today. You know, it's one place, one house, one family, very, very integrated, very aligned. And I think that makes a difference in the healing.
And then Doug Ulman, I just wanted to ask you about about every year, 2 years, I have a show on Pelotonia, and one of my favorite things about it is when I bring in different people from the community that are medical community that are applying for the grants and are having, they, you know, of course, have to have their own team then, and it's really interesting to hear what people are working on. What has and just little things like someone got a grant for these glasses that helps them operate better. I mean, they're like Google glasses, although Google said they're not going to be producing those anymore. I just did a show on that this week. So, tell us about some of the stuff that kind of amazes you when you look at what the grants have gone out to.
Well, I mean, Mike touched on a few of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this gene for Lynch syndrome, which now is sort of being applied to people all across Ohio, is exciting. But more than that, I mean, the way I look at it is we as the Pelotonia community, the Pelotonia movement, are funding, in many regards, the next generation of scientists. I mean, some of the people that are receiving funding are actually sort of undergrad students. Yeah. Some are sort of postdocs, PhDs. I mean, it sort of runs the gamut. And when you think about young people across the country who are sort of transforming their industry, or as we would say, disrupting their industry, we want to fund those big ideas that are actually really high risk, that take very little funding in sort of the whole construct of cancer research, but just seed these ideas. Because if one or two of these ideas takes off, the impact is massive. And you know, it's easy to say this, but it's true in cancer. Everything, and I think to Mike's point about best in class and having the best impact, everything that happens at the James that is successful will be translated around the world. So yes, it will benefit all of us in this room and our loved ones and families in Central Ohio, but as soon as that new drug for leukemia gets approved by the FDA, everyone around the country and across the world is now using that drug. And so by participating in Pelotonia, and because of the generosity of many of our partners who are here in the room today that make sure that 100% of every dollar goes to fund cancer research at the James, which is very unique and will not change, you can be assured that your participation is truly changing lives. And you know, not only someone like Jerry's life, but many other people in this room who I know have experienced this disease firsthand. So it's just an honor to be collaborating with people like Mike and his team at the James, because again, there's nothing that cannot be accomplished if we don't work together in this manner.
I would just add, really important point, the 100% that Doug mentioned is really critical, that there's no money taken out for overhead, and that's every dollar. The other thing is that, and I thought I saw Gustavo Leone, he's one of our senior scientists here. Raise your hand, Gustavo. There you are. So Gustavo set up a whole peer-reviewed process for us. So no one gets a grant that Doug's talking about, and there's, you know, 10, 20, 30 grants every year, and they're $100,000, et cetera, without peer review. And that goes for the students too. We've given 330 student scholarships, probably only funded about 25% of them that are coming in, and they're all reviewed by scientists that aren't competing for the money, both at Ohio State and outside of Ohio State. So again, understanding where the money goes, how it's used, it's very, very rigorous. It's hard to get Pelotonia money, and that's due to the nice work of Gustavo and his colleagues setting up a system to make sure it's foolproof. So,
There is one thing I'd like to add about what made my decision also very important about getting treatment at the James. I want to encourage everyone to understand how important clinical trials are, and that, as to Dr. Caligiuri's point, we had 3 drugs 30 years ago, and the reason we have the drugs we have today that are effective is because people got in the chair and said, I'll do this. And I chose a clinical trial because it was the most aggressive treatment, and I felt out of all the options I had, it would be grueling, but in the long haul, it was the right decision, and I know it was. But I want to encourage everyone to understand how crucial clinical trials are, and if anyone you know brings this up, let them explore it more and be supportive, because sometimes you get the best treatment in a clinical trial because you're under the microscope of these people every single day.
yeah, it's been shown over and over that when you're on a clinical trial, which means trying an investigational agent, very often it's with the standard therapy, so it's added to. By law, they have to keep very, very careful attention to you. Even if you leave the country, they have to watch where you go so that your follow-up is very careful. And you've made an excellent point, Jerry. I mean, I started saying 3 drugs 30 years ago. Now there's 15 for breast cancer alone. That happened because people like you went on clinical trials. It proved to be helpful. It got to the FDA. It was approved. So when you walk in now, it's like these are the 3 drugs we're using for breast cancer. That's because many people before you went on clinical trials, participated, and it was successful. So thank you for making that point.
It is the Columbus Metropolitan Club's tradition to take audience questions. Please state your name and ask your question. We thank you in advance for avoiding long editorial comments. I know everybody in this room does. So belly up to the mic.
Hi, Andy Campbell. Happy to get things started here. It sounds like the pace of technology is really going rapidly in the development. I'm wondering if you could comment on the policy side of it, the rules and regulations, specifically the FDA. Are they keeping up?
Want me to, or
I
it's
picketed them, so
you picketed them. Thank you.
I did.
Good. That's good. You'll probably get many different answers. I think the FDA, I would say, is listening. There is a sense of urgency with drug development in cancer and many other diseases. And, you know, they err on the side of safety, and sometimes with very good reason. You know, what people are willing to do when they have a diagnosis and take the risk of side effects, it's always questionable. So I would say they're listening and trying to respond and have, you know, limited budget. It's improved, definitely. Just go ahead.
No, Avastin.
Yeah. Talk
Well,
about it.
it's interesting because you mentioned the FDA, and the #1 cancer drug in the world is a drug called Avastin. And Avastin is approved for all types of cancer use except women with breast cancer. So I find that very interesting, and actually a group of us went down and we did picket the FDA to try to get it appealed. It didn't work.
How does that work? I mean, how can that be? And how much does the FDA care? It seems like sometimes things are on a fast track, and other times it seems like it takes forever.
There is something called the fast track, and especially for rarer forms of cancers. Let's take the drug I just talked about, where at Ohio State we showed the first activity of this drug, ibrutinib. It got fast tracked and got approved very quickly, and to Doug's point, was all around the world in months. So there is a fast track. It's got to be explosive results from the clinical trial, kind of a no-brainer, and they will move on. And that's new. That's what I meant. They're listening. That's new. Where, come on, this shouldn't take. The drug can take. Is it done? What is it? 10 years to develop from the time of someone says, "I think I have something," till the time where it's actually in the pharmacy. Can be 10 years. So.
$1 billion.
And $1 billion plus. So ibrutinib was probably in the 3-year range. So it can happen.
Well, I'm happy to go again.
I was going to say, I can go all day.
Well, me too. Kind of related to that, and you talk about the cost of the development of the drug, but there's been some controversy about the availability of some of these cancer drugs. That might have been a short-term supply situation, but also the cost and the position people might be put in as to whether or not to live another month or to cover the cost of the medication that might preserve their life.
I guess that's me. No, it's a huge issue and complicated issue. You know, pharma spends enormous amounts of money developing drugs, and there's a lot of water that goes under the bridge that we never hear about. All the, you know, the ratio might be 1,000 to 1, and you're paying for all that water that goes under the bridge in a sense because, you know, it's what drives the business. They're looking for that billion-dollar blockbuster. And what's happening, because I was talking earlier, it's like, I've got a lung cancer drug. Well, it turns out it's only going to work on 5 of you. Okay, well, I thought it was going to work on everybody because I thought lung cancer was one disease. Turns out it's about 90 diseases. It's going to work on 5 of you. Well, we're going to have to raise the price because we've spent the money thinking, you know, this was going to be a catch-all Lipitor kind of drug, and it's not. So you get drugs that just, you know, very tiny, you might use it 3 times and it's just expensive. And that's the rational side from pharma. On the other side, the government sometimes doesn't have a lot of clarity about how it reimburses for drugs. It's kind of it's an unusual process without getting into here. It's unusual, and it varies from country to country. So the same drug could be 1/5 of the price in one country versus where it is in another country. So I'm sorry, I can't be more specific. It's a big problem. And access to care, you could really step back and say, who has access to what care? It's kind of the same problem, just a little bigger. See another question. I can't see out there, but I can see somebody at the microphone.
First of all, I'm Cindy Lazarus. I want to thank Dr. Caligiuri as one of the riders for being out there and being so supportive of us when we're having a hard ride. And welcome to Doug and your family. My question's for you, Doug. Thinking about the participants in the Pelotonia event, how do you balance the kind of explosive growth that we've already seen with the desire to have more people participate with the safety of those participants?
Great question. First and foremost, I want to thank you for participating, and I want to also acknowledge all my colleagues who are here because, quite frankly, what they have accomplished as a small team in 6 years is really, really inspiring, given the explosive growth that you've talked about. So. I think it's a big challenge. I mean, you know, everywhere I go and I talk to people and people say, well, so next year you're going to have 10,000 riders and then 15,000 riders and then 20,000 riders. And Chris, who's sitting directly behind you, who is in charge of safety and the route, would have a heart attack if we came back and said, oh yeah, we're going to have 20,000 riders. So I think it's a balance in terms of how do we use the Pelotonia sort of platform and this movement to engage more people in a way that is constructive and safe and meets people where they are. I've said a lot in recent weeks that Pelotonia is not an event. It really is a social movement. And in order to be a successful social movement, we have to give people the opportunity to participate in different ways. And so whether that's the virtual ride, whether that's people all across the country who could participate in some way online or engage with the movement in some other way, I think we want to explore all of those options. And we also want to really work with our participants on both fundraising and stewardship, and make sure that everybody who's participating, whether you're a rider or whether you're a donor, that you understand the impact of the dollars you're raising, because I think that will fuel further engagement. So the goal is not going to be to just continue to add as many riders as we can in a way that may become less safe, but rather to really focus on expanding and broadening the opportunities for people to be a part of the movement.
So how many do you want? I mean, what's the limit?
Well, so
me or Doug?
Yeah, exactly.
How many rode last year?
7,200.
Wow.
7270.
Not that we're
exactly.
keeping
Not
close
that
track. 7,207.
But I think it goes back to your question to Mike about the new James. I mean, ultimately, Would we like to have more people as a part of the Pelotonia movement? Absolutely, and we're going to do that. But the goal should be the ultimate impact. So if the ultimate impact is to fund as much high-quality research as we can and ultimately develop new drugs and save lives, then that should be what we keep our eye on. And so we could stand here and say, well, we raised $200 million, and that may mean that we had a huge impact, or that may mean that we didn't have a huge impact. I would rather be standing here, sitting here a year from now or 2 years from now saying we had 3 more drugs that were developed that have saved thousands of lives, or we funded these scientists who looked at this molecular or genetic issue and found the cause of another type of cancer that ultimately can be solved in a better manner. So while the money is important, and it is paramount to funding the research, and the number of riders is important, I think the ultimate impact is what we need to stay focused on. And Mike and Gustavo and Dr. Pollack and others here have done such a great job ensuring that those dollars are used wisely, which is so critical.
You know, another, to add to what Doug said, another group that's here is our foundation board members, people that are really devoted to raising money for the James. Many of them ride, certainly volunteer, and contribute to Pelotonia. Amazing. Don is one. I saw Irene here and others as well, Diane and Cindy and many people, and thank you for that. One of the things we're doing to the point of changing things is we're building the Amazon, right? So we're building the system where you come in, I sequence your tumor, I say here it is, and I'm able to look across thousands and thousands, go, who else with that molecular type has your tumor? And I think at your table, I just noticed this at my table, is this little booklet that actually explains that, and there's a call to action if you're interested in being involved in that, because it's going to take more than one cancer center and a lot of money to build this, but this is one of the ways we get to the cancer-free world, and it's a big initiative that we're taking on, so I thought I'd just tell people about that. Thank those who participate.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed today's forum. I certainly did. Lots of information, lots of positive thoughts and encouragement. I should mention that Pelotonia is coming up again in August. They're going to cap this off, so you better go sign up right now. Hurry up. Join us for coffee and cookies and more conversation in the lobby. Remember, you can view this all over again and share it with your friends on CTV, Columbus Television, on WOSU, and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Once more, thanks to our sponsors, all the Cardinal Health folks who are here, all the Porter Wright folks who are down there.
Pelotons, both of them.
Both of them, I know. Believe me, I know. We're going to be talking about that more later today. And thanks to our speakers, Ann Fisher, Jerry Spear, thank you, Jerry, Doug Ulman, and Dr. Mike Caligiuri. Thanks to all of you, and please come back. Thank you, Michael.